welcome back to another episode of the Karter Cast. I'm your host, Karter. Baughan. With me, as always, Sparrow. With us today, from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, it's Josh Graham. He hosts The Drive with Josh Graham from 3 to 6 Eastern every day, based out of Winston-Salem. Josh, how you doing?
We're doing great, guys. You look at the calendar now, and you're talking about just a few weeks. Like, we're talking about preseason football games that we already have, and it's not. I mean, college football will be played this month, regular season games. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, I know. We finally have football back. We're not having to do silly segments. I'm sure with you guys out in Winston-Salem, you guys were having to figure out some kind of content to do in July. Unfortunately, right now, we should be talking about fall camp, quarterback depth, who we like. But instead, with all this crap going on, we now have to talk about conference realignment. What's going on? Is the ACC going to be alive? And today we're doing our ACC preview. And let's start off with conference realignment, unfortunately. Josh, what are your thoughts overall? Let's start off here. Is the ACC going to be dead in a couple years?
No, it's not, because the grant of rights is a thing. Regardless what Florida State says, they have until August 15th to prove whether or not they're, not all bark and no bite. Because Bubba Cunningham's a really smart guy, the AD at North Carolina, and he spelled it out pretty clearly. The way that we're all kind of reading that document is, you've signed over your rights through 2036. You're talking about close to $500 million you would have to pay to get out of that agreement based on the way most people read it. So unless Florida State has some magical lawyers that other schools do not, and every ACC school has taken a look at this document, that doesn't mean that they want to leave. Some are just worried whether or not other schools have a means of getting out. That document is going to be what saves them. And also, there aren't enough schools that have landing spots that would help Florida State in a scenario where you get the majority of schools agreeing to disband.
So you mentioned landing spots there. Still in the ACC, there's been talk of California, of Stanford, all the way from the other side of the country joining the conference. Do you think there's actually any traction to that? Do you think we see California, Stanford in the Atlantic Coast Conference, or is that kind of just fluff because there's 4 leftover teams?
No, I do think it's legitimate that these discussions are happening. I don't think it will happen because of a lot of the challenges that are obvious. You talk about the amount of travel you would have for not just football, but all the Olympic sports. You have the economic revenue question of, if you're making $40 million a year, and the biggest complaint that schools have is you're not getting enough revenue distribution a year, then just simple economics says, if you add schools, they better add more than $40 million a year in terms of their value. And Stanford and Cal neither add that. They're not USC, they're not Oregon or even Washington when you look at the pecking order, or else they'd already be in the Big 10 or the Big 12. But the other piece of this, the reason why I do think there's some legitimacy to it, there are reasons why this is worth discussing for the ACC. Number one being full distribution or expanded reach for the ACC network. You can reach one of the most populous states in the United States and California and have that be part of your footprint from a television perspective. You could have TV windows in terms of inventory from about 12 noon on a Saturday till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And that's valuable to ESPN. That's valuable to the ACC network. There's the academic piece where they would fit in nicely with a lot of the schools. The ACC still prides itself as being a great academic institution. There's perhaps opportunity to revisit the television deal with ESPN that runs through 2036 to see if there's more money you can milk out of them as a good faith effort, as a good faith partner, to have a contract that runs that far, trying to keep people happy. And who knows? Notre Dame has played Stanford every year since 1988. That might add some leverage if you have more control of Stanford's schedule in trying to get Notre Dame to join the league. Now, I, again, don't think that this is something – I don't think the pros outweigh the cons, but there is some disingenuous, lazy narrative creating where a lot of people act like there aren't even reasons to have the discussion. There are reasons to have it, and I think I just outlined them.
Do you think it's fair for people to blame Jim Phillips for some of this kind of stuff going on? Also, previous commissioners and university presidents should be at fault too, correct?
Well, I think John Swafford deserves some blame too, in that a big part of the reason why the ACC is in the position it is not that they expanded. They needed to expand in 2002 and to a degree 10 years ago for survival's sake. Like, you needed to have Miami, you needed to have Virginia Tech. There's reasons why that they did that. But in the last realignment cycle, we can look in hindsight and say there were schools that were added that hasn't added much to the league. As of right now, Louisville has not added much. You look at, Pittsburgh, even though they won an ACC football title, they haven't added that much. Boston College is a perfect example of this, where these are schools that haven't added a lot. So the ACC, see, I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan, and there's this misconception that the Orioles never spend and that they're cheap. No, they spend. It's just when they spend on Chris Davis, who they're still paying and will pay for another 10 years. The ACC was right to expand, but they chose some of the wrong schools in doing so.
I agree with that statement. Anything else on realignment, Karter? Do you want to get into the conference preview here?
Last thing is, behind the scenes, I know Bubba Cunningham said that he's not, we're stuck in this deal, this is what we're doing. But do you think he's also having those conversations behind the scenes with the SEC, with the Big Ten, and maybe with a partnership deal with Virginia, like we've seen rumored? I mean, obviously it's rumored and it's Twitter, we never know. But do you think those are going on?
He's looking at him across the bar. He's looking at him across the bar, Karter, just eyeing him down just a little bit.
No. Let me help you guys out. Think about this a different way. The SEC and the SEC and the ACC are on the same team. They're not going to poach each other, because nowadays in college sports, the SEC is not run by Greg Sankey. The ACC is not run by Jim Phillips. They're both run by Jimmy Pitaro and ESPN. When you are the source of $40 million a year per school in the ACC, and close to 60 and 70 million reportedly for the SEC starting next year, you run those conferences. You own those conferences, and nothing happens unless that person signs off or that entity signs off. So when you hear this stuff about North Carolina and the SEC, or even Florida State to the SEC, that's never going to happen for this reason, and it's most important. It's the way you got to think about it. ESPN owns both these conferences, and they love the deal they have with the ACC. They don't want to pay more to the SEC. They don't want to go back to the renegotiating table with the ACC, especially as all these layoffs are happening at ESPN, especially as an NBA rights deal is about to come up in the next few years, and they're shelling out so much to try and get Super Bowls and more from the NFL. So that's not going to happen. The Big Ten piece of this, Virginia looking elsewhere, maybe that's something you look at. But then the Big Ten, you look at adding Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC. The reason why Florida State wasn't part of that exploratory meeting is because they don't want to wage holy war with ESPN and start a fight where these schools are now trying to poach from each other. There's kind of this unspoken agreement of, we're not going to mess with these television contracts, these grant of rights. There's a reason why Texas and Oklahoma have not joined the SEC yet, despite that agreement coming last year or 2 years ago, right? They don't want to mess with the TV agreements, because the TV folks are the ones that are running this. So that's why I don't think anything happens with the schools getting poached from the ACC.
I had one last thing, Karter, real quick. Big picture-wise here, Josh, when the dust settles, and in a couple of years when all this conference realignment talk maybe died down a little bit, what's the final product going to look like? What are fans going to see in a couple of years to be like, oh, this is the result of everything that happened in 2023, 2024? What do you think, when the dust settles, the landscape's going to look like?
I don't know if the dust is going to settle in the next few years. It might with this cycle, but I think where we're headed, and this is why I think it's a positive that the ACC has this television thing that goes through 2036. I think that it's inevitable that we're going to get to a place where college sports is professionalized, that college football is a professional entity and breaks away from the rest of the other college sports. I think we're eventually going to arrive at that place, and the ACC has the advantage of having this grant of rights that goes through 2036, so that they're not the Pac-12, that there is still an Atlantic Coast Conference when football inevitably breaks away and professionalizes. So that way, all the other regional stuff that we enjoy, that we hope the tradition remains the same for, basketball, baseball, that stuff remains intact and remains okay. I don't know when that happens, but it feels like it's something that could happen over the next decade. And at this point, that's the thing that saves the league. The thing that saves the league is if football becomes its own entity and breaks away.
I think that's right on the nail there. And then last thing is all this matters is all I really care about with conference realignment is ensuring that we have some Greensboro ACC tournaments. That's all I care about.
You're guaranteed two of those in the next decade. You're guaranteed two of them. The mayor was telling me last week of Greensboro, Nancy Baughan, that she hopes to have more than that. But I can almost guarantee to you, based on what I've been told, that in 2028 or 29, they will be going to Greensboro for the 75th year anniversary. And I venture to say 3 or 4 years after that, in 2032 or 33, they'll be back in Greensboro too. So they'll have at least two, and I'll be pleasantly surprised if they get one more after that.
Yeah, and then we can get, San Francisco ACC tournament when we get down Stanford. But anyhow, let's move on. Let's actually talk football now.
Chase
ACC
Center, baby. Chase Center.
Chase Center. No, we're going to Oakland. We're reviving Oakland.
Oracle, yeah.
Going to Oracle, yeah.
ACC preview. The two favorites are Clemson, FSU. Depending on what books you look at, some are favored a little more. They're basically around the same spot. Who do you have winning the ACC? We all know the Josh Graham pick of Pitt a couple years ago. Who are you hitching your wagon to this year?
Don't forget Coastal. The North Carolina winning the Coastal last year too. It's Clemson. It's Clemson by a mile. The Florida State stuff. If you want to talk about my favorite bets for the preseason this year, it's taking the under 9.5 for Florida State. It frankly doesn't make a lot of sense to me that Florida State is right in line with Clemson, considering Clemson's bad year. Like, what's been bad for Clemson the last decade is losing 3 games, but they win double-digit games every single year. FSU has lost at least 3 games every year since 2016. Conference games. I'm not even talking about out of conference. So the fact that Florida State has to open up with LSU, who's a legitimate national title contender, and then in conference play has a very difficult schedule, which includes going to Clemson, by the way. I'm going with the Tigers. I think offensively, Garrett Riley, something to bet in. These skill position players, Antonio Williams, Bo Collins, they've got dudes. I really like their tight end. You got Will Shipley back. I think it's Clemson in a runaway to win the ACC this year.
Well, I agree with that, Josh, because I'm looking at the schedule here. It's hard for me to see a world where Clemson loses more than 2 games, even if they do have a slip up against Notre Dame or a North Carolina, or even a Miami here, or just some of those bad teams that have a slip up. I can't see 2 losses on this schedule. I think the DJU shadow's kind of gone. I think Cade Klubman's going to have a full year under his belt. He's the guy this year. I think FSU's win total's too high as well. I'm going to agree with you there. I don't know how they're both 9.5. So you mentioned FSU under. I like Clemson over. I don't see a world where they lose more than 2 games.
There you go. You called Miami a bad team there. Be careful.
Okay, not bad. Maybe again they shouldn't lose.
Be careful. Maybe I might have Miami in that ACC championship game that Clemson play.
Okay.
Just throwing that out there. A little bit Tyler Van Dyke, ACC Player of the Year sprinkle. And Miami making the ACC championship game runner-up.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting is because, like, Clemson, it's the win total versus ACC argument because at South Carolina at the end of the year is not a game to overlook for Clemson.
They're not losing that game back-to-back years, Karter. They're not losing that back-to-back years.
I'm going to clip this. I'm going to put it in the barrier after the show. I'm going to have this clipped ready, and then on November 25th, we'll see what happens. We don't know yet. I'm not a Spencer Rattler guy. I still think Clemson does it. With all that being said, I think Clemson wins the ACC. I wouldn't be surprised if they finish 12-0 this season. I actually really like Cade Klubnik. I think Cade Klubnik's an awesome quarterback. It's a little addition by subtraction losing DJU, who obviously he's not a bad guy or anything, but he wasn't a great quarterback. And like you mentioned, Clemson's down year, 3 losses. Like, you kidding me? They're going to win 10 games. I've already bet over 9.5 wins for Clemson. I can't wait. Garrett Riley, new offensive coordinator from TCU coming in. Clemson, I think they're plus like 180 to win the ACC. I still think that's a good bet.
I'm with you. Let's do it. Right. Pound it. Hammer it.
Connor, do you have anybody else? Let's move on real quick. Let's move on. I want to talk about the most overrated team. Who's the team you see their win total and you're like, or people are super high on and you're saying, I just don't get it. I don't see it with this team. I guess you might have mentioned it with FSU a little bit, but is there another team but outside of that, or is FSU you're like this team is 8-4, 7-5 type?
FSU is the top team that comes to mind. Another one's North Carolina, though, because
Ooh, that
the
hurts.
Tar
That
Heels.
hurts.
No, it's just we just saw this movie 2 years ago. Oh man, we got the quarterback who's top 5 in the draft, and just pay no mind to the fact that he lost his 2 top receivers and his top running back. No, that's fine. And, I mean, he just lost Josh Downs. He just lost Antoine Green, and I hear this talk about the transfers that they're bringing in and such, but at North Carolina and pretty much any school not named Clemson in the ACC, when you lose draft picks, multiple on a side of the ball, it's hard to maintain that. And then defensively, they have a lot of guys who have 4 and 5 stars next to their name, but they just still haven't shown it yet. But more than anything, I don't mean this as a huge jab at North Carolina, and certainly I don't mean it at Drake May, but the schedule, it's just brutal, man. Like, I have no idea where they're going to be 6 games in. There's so many different iterations of the schedule or how things could turn out the first 6 games. I feel pretty confident saying they're not going to be 6-0. And then you talk about the last 3 where you're going to Raleigh, where you're going to Clemson in back-to-back weeks and playing Duke, who's good. It's just a gauntlet. So when you talk about what you're replacing and where the expectations are, and the program that you're talking about that's never really taken that leap forward, plus a difficult schedule, 8.5 wins. That's what we're talking about. I think this is a 7, maybe an 8-win football team.
So as a North Carolina guy here, Josh, that hurts. But it is the sad truth because you're looking at the schedule. It is a gauntlet. Now, I'm going to talk myself into Carolina winning 10 games, and I'm going to bet the over 8.5 just because I'm loyal. But there's so many transfers on the offensive side of the ball. You got both starting wide receivers as transfers coming in. A young running back room. You don't know who the clear set starter is. Defense, watching every game for the last, 10 years, the defense never lives up to expectations. They need to be good, not great this year. But with these transfers coming in, they need to carry a little more of the load. I don't know. I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried too.
Hold one second. You say you're going to talk yourself into 10 wins. What's the argument for this year's team being better than last year's?
It just really relies on the transfer skill guys, honestly. Like if they're dynamite, if Drake May has those weapons on the outside, but there's a world in which they start off.
Are they going to be better? Are any of those transfers going to be better than Josh Downs though?
No, I don't think so. No. Josh Downs is a legit NFL
talent,
slot receiver.
So the skill talent's going to be worse. The schedule's going to be more difficult. Again, they won 9 games last year. So
they did
8.5. It's like, well, just common sense says that. All right, the skill position's worse. You lost also Phil Longo, by the way. We're trying to figure out what it's going to be under Chip Lindsey. And then you talk about the schedule. It's all that leads me to say we're going low. We're going low.
I don't think losing Phil Longo is necessarily a bad thing. I think he was great on offense. He put up some big numbers, but it's time for a change. It was time for a change. So
maybe why you just mentioned he put up big numbers. The offense looked great.
Sam Howell broke records too. Yeah.
No. Say the defensive side is what needed the change.
Well, they tried to change that last year with Gene Chizik, and so I guess we'll see what year 2 looks like. But man, I don't know. Tight end groups are back. Tight end groups back. Drake May is going to have to run for 80 yards a game and pass for 300 yards a game if they're going to get 9 wins.
But the schedule is a lot harder this year.
I know. There's a world in which they lose to South Carolina. That App game is always a toss-up. I've got App friends in my life that I'm just terrified of now.
They're not going to lose to App, but I don't think they're going to beat South Carolina week 1. You can flip that.
Okay.
I don't think, and you mentioned the first 6 games: South Carolina in Charlotte, App, Minnesota, at Pitt, home Syracuse, home Miami.
Pitt scares me. Miami scares me. They're gonna beat Minnesota, so you're probably talking about
3 and
3 through 6, probably. But then if it's 3 and 3, then they got to win the rest of their games.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I've already hammered the under. This was music to my ears. I was just sitting here. This is like smooth jazz going in my ears as Josh was just going to town on Carolina right there. Under. You mentioned it. I don't have to reiterate it. The defense stinks. Drake May is going to keep them in games, yes, but does that result in 9 wins this year? No, not at all.
Can I give you a team that's just going to bum you out and make you sad?
Go for it.
Virginia under 3.5.
Yeah.
It's going to bum you out and make you sad because we're all going to be rooting for them based on what happened last year. But you look at their out of conference schedule. Like, here's their 3 out of conference games to open up: Tennessee and Nashville. They play James Madison, and then you play. I think they also play William and Mary. I'll have to double check that. They play Maryland,
do.
I believe, this year.
They
And
do play William and Mary.
And William and Mary's good, by the way. Watch out. Like, that's whatever that line is. Give me the Tribe plus the points. But that, and then you got the ACC slate. I don't see them getting to 4. And that's the lowest number. It's sad. I hope I'm wrong. My wife's a Virginia grad. I hope she's a big fan of the Karter cast, so I'm worried that she's going to get mad at me. But Virginia under is the other one.
Yeah, I'm Virginia under as well. I mean, it's like you said, it's sad to say after last season, the first 4 just scream bad. Tennessee, Nashville, JMU, then at Maryland, and then Brennan Armstrong revenge game against NC State. Yeah, Boston College might be, the feel-good game, but it's at BC still.
I like BC this year. Watch out for them. I think 5.5. That's one of the ones I actually look at as a potential over because I'm in on Emmett Morstead. I'm in on Jeff Hafley. I think the defense is going to be better, and I think they got a favorable schedule. Crazy fact with them, they are the only team in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference that will not play a team from the Carolinas this year. They don't play any of the 4 teams in North Carolina, any from South Carolina, obviously Clemson. They do not travel to the state of North Carolina or play a team from the state of North Carolina or South Carolina this year. I think that really benefits them.
Yeah, I'm looking at the schedule. That's interesting. That does benefit them a ton. Virginia does play at Carolina. That might be an easy win.
We got some funny Karter cast moments today. We're doing bits on the Karter cast now. All right, doing comedy shows.
Oldest rivalry in the South. Oldest rivalry in the South.
A team I want to bring up. They had a win total of 2.5 on some books, 3.5 last year. They ended up 9-4. Let's talk about the Duke Blue Devils real quick. They're at 6.5. Yes, their schedule's harder this year. What do you think about the second year Mike Elko Duke Blue Devils?
I honestly am fascinated to see it. Just to look at Riley Leonard and the step he could take. It's a lazy thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway because I believe in it. He looks a lot like Daniel Jones. He plays a lot like Daniel Jones. I think I'd be interested to see what type of season that he has and whether or not he could take the next step from a passing perspective, throw for over 3,000 yards. We joked with him a few weeks ago that he's deceptively quick. He loves hearing how deceptively quick he is. We went into all the white quarterback general terms that people use. Oh, sneaky athletic. That's another one that you hear.
Lunch pail guy.
Jim Rat. Jim Rat. That's right. He's a student of the game.
Gritty.
He has all those traits attached to him. And you have to play Clemson on your schedule at some point. And I think there's no better time to play them when they're breaking in a new offensive coordinator and a new starting quarterback this year than week 1, and to have it in your building where it should be sold out. I'm not saying Duke will win the game, but that's the best shot they have at getting Clemson in recent memory.
I agree. Opening up with Clemson like that, I do think it gives them the best shot just because there's so many unknowns, for a guy coming in, a lot of new faces on Clemson this year. The thing with Duke is Riley Leonard being deceptively quick. He had, 700 rush yards last year? I didn't expect Duke to even get 4 or 5 wins last year, so I'm also going to keep my mouth shut on this one. I'm not going to bet either side of this win total at 6.5. Karter, you're the Duke guy here. I'll defer to you.
I have Duke over 6.5. I was trying not to talk myself into them, as a little 37-1 sprinkle to win the ACC. I talked myself out of that one. That it wasn't worth the sprinkle in my eyes. I think they go 7-5. I look at the schedule right after Clemson. You have 3 wins with Lafayette, Northwestern, and Connecticut, and then Notre Dame probably a loss, and then you keep.
Don't sleep on UConn.
I was going to say UConn might give them some problems.
I don't think UConn's bad, but I just think Duke is better.
Well, we'll see. Jim Mora, he's got him coached up.
Oh, trust me, I lost money. I lost money betting against UConn last year. Don't worry, I'm well aware. Duke Clemson spread is 12.5. Clemson's favored by 12.5 in Durham. Fair
Tasty.
Or not fair?
Tasty for the Blue Devils.
I think
feels like a trap though. feels like a trap, but I think I might. I'm going to take a good hard look at that. I don't want to pick a side on that one yet, but I will be thinking about that one quite a bit.
Connor, give us a win total you like.
Win total I like. Well, it's not going to be Carolina, sadly enough. I like Pitt this year. I don't think Pitt's going to be bad. Their win total is what? Is it 7 on the nose right now? Is that what I'm looking at right now? I think they can get to 7 wins. I think they can win their first 3. I mean, Carolina, as much as I hate to admit it, that could be a win depending on how Carolina looks in week 4. I think Pittsburgh gets to 7 wins. Who they got this year? They got the BC guy, Phil Jerkovich, right, coming in to start. No NC State, no Clemson on the schedule. I think they have a solid O-line. They can control time of possession. Pittsburgh's really like a gritty team. 7 wins is not an insane amount. I don't know if I actually bet it, but that's one of the teams we haven't talked about that I'm looking at like, eh.
What do you think, Josh?
Pitt's good. I think they're a top 5, top 6 team in the ACC. I could see them getting to 7 wins, but they're right there in that Wake Forest, Pittsburgh, NC State zone of there being some variance. Like, are you a 5-win team or are you a 6 or a 7, maybe 8-win team? It's hard to really separate that middle group once you get past the top 4 teams in the league.
They do play Carolina and Florida State at home, so I think one of those could be a win for Pittsburgh.
I agree.
You mentioned this team. You said don't sneak past them. Don't look past them. This is the last team we'll probably talk about today since we're running out of time. Miami. Miami's win total is 7.5. I want to hear your Miami opinion. Why you think you might have them in the ACC title game?
Talent. I do have them in the ACC title game. I do have Tyler Van Dyke as my ACC Player of the Year, just because it's not really about who the best player is. It's about the guy who sees to overachieve the most during the season. Best evidence with basketball. Coach K might be the best coach ever. You can make that argument, but never once in the final 22 years he was Duke's coach did he win ACC Coach of the Year, right? So it's not, and Seth Greenberg won that award twice. It's about what people think of you and how you exceed those expectations. And Miami, in college football, the productivity and the results come a year after the hype oftentimes. So that's why you should watch out for Texas A&M this year after all that recruiting hype and stuff a year ago and they didn't meet expectations. North Carolina, 2 years ago, all the hype that was there and look at the recruiting that Mac Brown's done. And then it was a dud of a season. A year later, you saw Drake May step in, who was a big recruit, obviously, and a lot of these guys that were, just results of stacking great recruiting classes. Miami has done that the last few years, and Mario Cristobal did a great job of that in year 1, recruiting-wise. So while the hype wasn't met a year ago, and it feels like no one's wanting to pick them because, again, they felt like they were burned a year ago, the same way no one picked Carolina a year ago, except me, 2 years ago, because of the hype that was there that season. Right, and you. Good for you.
But that's every year.
Miami still has all that talent, and they have Tyler Van Dyke. And if you look at Mario Cristobal, what he did his second year when he was at Oregon, and the big jump they took, I see that happening with Miami this year, and I think the Canes are that talented team off the radar screen that will be the challenger to Clemson. Every year we kind of see that team emerge that no one's seeing coming. I think that's the Canes.
I wrote down a quick stat here on the Canes. They were 0-6 last year in games where they had 2 or more turnovers. They were 5-1 with 1 or less turnovers. So if Van Dyke is that much better this year, if they can hold on to the ball, defense, and get off the field, I think they're going to be all right. They had some embarrassing losses last year, but like you said, this is the year. This is the year for them.
And that's the biggest part about, especially when you're betting on this kind of stuff, is you have that bad taste in your mouth, and you have to get rid of that taste out of your mouth, because last year I was all in on the sexy Miami team. It's the curse of being the second best odds in the ACC, like Carolina a couple years ago, Miami last year, where everyone's like that team, and then they always get cursed because they don't reach expectations. Maybe FSU this year. But I have that bad taste in my mouth from Miami, and I think that's the difficult part. I think you mentioned that if you're going to bet on this kind of stuff, you have to eliminate that, because that's what they want you to think.
Josh, I had one quick thing. I know we're running out of time. Just since, we're Winston guys. How's Wake Forest looking this year? They got redshirt guy Mitch Griffith starting in. I know Donovan Green got hurt. He's going to miss a lot of time. That came out yesterday. What do you think about Wake? They're losing A.T. Perry. That's a lot of production. Obviously, Sam Hartman's at Notre Dame. How are they looking? The number's at 6.5 this year.
It's a standard year for them. They've made, bowl games every year since 2016. And you just talk about like a really quality coach with a really quality staff, and Dave Clawson and Warren Ruggiero. And I mean, you just think about this. Wake Forest, every time they've broken in a new quarterback since Dave's arrived, and this is year 10, they're playing as a true freshman. John Walford, Sam Hartman in 2018, Jamie Newman when he took over after Sam went down in camp, 2019. You talk about, those are all guys who started as freshmen at Wake. This is Mitch Griffiths' third or fourth year in the program, and he's stepping in. So Wake, he's going to be fine, and he's going to do the job, and the numbers are going to be really good. It is a lot to replace, as you mentioned. Donovan Green, fair not to expect him back this year. Best case scenario, you get him back in mid-November, and the season's pretty much over at that point. A.T. Perry, you lose. You still do have Jamal Banks and Taylor Marin, and you got Justice Ellison in the backfield. So the skill position guys are okay, but it's a lot of guys that they're replacing offensive defense. And I think this is the year we learn, well, what's the standard when you lose a lot at Wake Forest? Like where is this program exactly under Dave Clawson? Because if they make a bowl game this year and win 6 or 7, then you're talking about, well, that's no doubt the baseline for what this program should be each and every year, which is an incredible thing to say about Wake Forest.
I think it's dead on. I just didn't have that much on Wake because I just think there's a lot of unknowns other than Dave Clawson. Is that fair? Yeah,
it is. Just because there are a lot of guys, there are going to be a lot of new faces that are out there. But if you've been around the program, they're names you've seen before, but they redshirt, they're older. These guys, they've been around and they understand what the system is. So we'll see where the standard's at with Wake this year.
Perfect. All right, well, that'll do it from us. We're running out of time here. Josh, thank you so much for coming on. Follow him on Twitter at Josh Graham Radio, and check out The Drive with Josh Graham from 3 to 6 Eastern out of Winston-Salem. Josh, if you're ever looking at your podcast demographics and you're looking at you're like, who on earth is listening in Salt Lake City, Utah? Just know you got a listener from Salt Lake City, Utah. You and Will do a great job over there. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys. Really appreciate it, Karter and Connor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
care.
Josh.
And, we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.